Hello everyone. Today I wanted to talk about some of those alternate clay materials in the next iteration. Now that you've made them, hopefully you found the ingredients. The flour has gone the way of toilet paper in that it's disappeared from store shelves. So I know that may be hard for you to find right now, but assuming you did and you're interested in exploring these materials and mining them for their properties that are very similar to clay and the chance to build some hand skills that will serve you well when you come back to clay in the future. So hopefully you have something like that to work with. We had two different types that we talked about in an earlier demo clip. One was the flour and water and salt mixture. We call that salt dough. It's a kind of a Play-Doh. It has a very unique characteristic as material when it's really, really wet. I have mixed some here. You can see mine is really, really soupy almost. It's almost like slip. One tip to work with it once you've mixed it is to dry it. Take some of the moisture out, and in doing so get a different kind of structure, retaining some of its plasticity, but also removing some of the water so that it has more inherent structure to build with. So one way that I do that is I simply roll it in newspaper. Just did some here. So I have just a roll of newspaper and I spread it out, roll it, and slowly let the water from the salt dough be wicked into the newspaper. And this has not been in here very long, so it's still quite soupy, but I can see that the newspaper is taking the moisture out. Once I'm ready to try and work with it as a stiffer material, I use these sorts of strange fake credit cards that you get sent as promotional things. If you sign up, you can use this as a credit card, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I save that material and it makes a nice kind of plastic kind of rib, if you will. So I'm going to use that, and really it helps me scrape it away from the newspaper, release it. And in the short time it's been drying, it has gotten a little bit more buildable. Okay. So I might work with this over time to get it to just the right dryness for what I want it to do. That's one thing. Another way to bring a kind of structure to this kind of doughy, soft material is to add something to it. And I got very interested in working with dryer lint from the laundry. And you can see I have some just from my lint gathering device of my clothes dryer. And so what I did was I mixed it into the salt dough. And I've been letting it also dry in a newspaper wrap to try and get some of the moisture out because it's really, really wet. So now I'm just going to scrape it away so I can release it and see how it's going for structure. So the lint is fiber. So you can see that fiber really gives it a kind of strength. It's also got a very strange texture, kind of a hairy, strange texture from the fiber of the lint. So that's something I might be really interested in. So still not really going to stand up for me, but just like with clay, when you have soft material in a flat form like this, you might need to use a mold of some kind to set a shape. And then when this material gets even harder through dryness, it will support the shape that the mold has, that you've been using to support the wet material with the mold. So a simple mold that, you can make at home is just some soft material like newspaper. Again, the newspaper will have the ability to wick water out. It also can be easily molded into a one-time use mold. You can just crumple it softly like I'm doing to get a kind of dome shape to wrap this around. You could also bring structure to the newspaper as a mold by using masking or blue tape to kind of give it a specific structured shape that will then dictate its shape onto this form. So what's happening now is I literally just draped it around the ball, and over time that will stiffen, or even over a bigger amount of time, it'll become completely hard and dry, and that could be a base, like a pinched form, that I could coil and build up from to get to some similar forms as when you're coil building in ceramics, from a base that allows you increment by increment to build height and volume, wider areas and narrower areas, coil by coil. While it's against this newspaper mold, it's a good time to experiment with impressing the material to leave an impression of something in it. I have something here. Oh, this is a fired piece of ceramic that has a mosaic-like carved texture on it. And so it was just here in my studio, so I thought I would just sort of see what happens if I try and... Now this is not really doing very much because it's still very, very soft. I need more structure here to hold the impression. And the fiber from the lint is also dictating a resistance to the impression. Okay, so that's just something interesting. I would wait now, have to wait until this gets some more drying time. Wow, it's really, really soft. Another thing that I have that I use in my ceramic studio from time to time is a heat gun that allows me to set heat settings and really blast materials with heat, a point heat, to stiffen them quickly. Now, I know you probably don't have something like that where you're working right now, but you may have a hairdryer. And a hairdryer is also something that puts you in the driver's seat, like you know, into what I call cooking show time, where you can force things along more quickly rather than waiting for the natural air drying process, which for this material could be quite long. So you might want to find a hairdryer, if you have one, to help move these things along to get to stiffer, more structured stages. So, you know, another thing so what I did here was, this is a previous from last week. I took the salt dough and I was able to make an impression. I don't know if you can see it here. There's an impression from this tool, or this shard of fired ceramics, that's into the form. The bottom of this was draped over newspaper. While it was wet, I poured some Easter egg dye on top, and it just soaked in and made a kind of a beautiful encaustic purple surface that's more of the material, because of how when I integrated the color, it was really wet, so it absorbed more fully in instead of stayed on the top of the surface. I dried this naturally on newspaper, and then I gave it heat with the heat gun. The next band here is another soft band that I attached to the harder material below of the same material, and it kind of slumped over and created a sort of organic shape as I was building. This next band is a whole nother material, this lightly colored band. This is the material that I talked about in a previous demo. That's made from cornstarch and salt, and it was cooked on the oven top for just about 4 minutes with water. This has got a whole nother possibility to mold with or to build with. I keep it in the Ziploc so it stays workable. So its consistency is right away much stiffer. You will see as I'm manipulating it that it really holds. It's almost got a feeling of silicone, or a kind of plasticky, rubbery feel, so it has much more inherent structure. So that's very appealing. So I can really treat this in more traditional ways I would treat clay, and build with techniques that I would normally think of building hollow forms in ceramics. So for instance, this sort of coil that I just made could become flattened. I have my sort of pink silicone rolling pin here. I'm just going to roll it flat. And in this flattened strip, I'm looking at the edges. Just like I would with clay, I really want to understand and get really curious about the materials in different stages with different tools, different ways I'm manipulating them. What is the quality of the edge? This is kind of splitting apart, which speaks to not being very plastic. So what happens if I put water there and try and, you know, compress that cracking back into a solid edge? But you can see I can wrap this around into a kind of simple open ring or cylinder, and I'm just pinching it into itself, and it certainly has the structure to stand up. So I could make some kind of bottom, attach this, and this could be a building block that keeps going. I could build out and in. I can work as I would with sheets of clay or slabs, like that. What I did with this other piece from before is I attached this cornstarch clay to the salt dough, and it just, while it was still pretty soft, it just blended together and became really hard and archival. So you can mix these materials. It's really kind of interesting to have the duality of material in one piece. It helps you communicate different ideas because the cornstarch clay has a tighter surface and the salt dough has a much more rough surface. And of course, there's a coloration that's different. You can see on the inside, when I blasted the salt dough to dry it, to stiffen it, if it gets really, really hot, it sort of gets toasty looking, almost like bread. And the smell is like bread. So it's really interesting. It's sort of like salt dough is literally a bread that you can't really eat. So it's like building with bread. If you want to use your oven, if you have an oven, be really careful with what you put in an oven, even at a lower temperature. We do not want to start a fire in your kitchen. But salt dough is perfectly safe to harden in the oven as well. I would recommend 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And anything greater is more likely to get this toasty kind of surface. If you heat it at that low 200 degrees, then it'll probably maintain a more even, neutral surface to work with as well. If you're going to paint these objects, which many of you will be thinking about how to give a skin or a painting, just like we have to negotiate a painted surface or a glazed surface to form in ceramics, you're going to want to invent ways to create opportunities to explore surface with these non-clay objects as well. If you're going to be coating it with some kind of colorant, the toastiness may not matter at all. There's no reason. But if you wanted to leave it exposed to become the finished surface, then you know that's a decision for aesthetics. So the other kind of thing to think about here, continuing along the lines of the surface. So now that I have a hard object, and it's pretty hard and archival, you can probably see that I began to work with color on this, on the hardness. I've used soft pencils, those dyes, which are very thin. I used a Caran d'Ache crayon that's water soluble and added water to sort of take it from the bumpiness of the crayon to a more watercolor effect. So you have a lot of possibilities to create glaze-like surfaces that have hard, stable edges of marks and fluid, soft, moving edges against and in conjunction with and contrasting to those more stable marks. Just like underglaze and slip provide that balance of hardness and stability as mark making to the flow of glaze when it's melting, the glass moving and fluxing. So really use this non-conventional clay project and materials as a chance to always plug it back in to and compare it to what you already know about how clay works. When you get back to ceramics, all of these manipulations will give you many, many more, a much richer understanding of the possibility of ceramic to your work. That's it for now. There'll be more later. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.